Okay, check this out. Among the Living came out in March 1987. State of Euphoria came out in September 1988. 18 months, that's how long Anthrax had to follow up one of the most celebrated thrash albums ever recorded, including touring, writing, recording, and mixing. Let's look at the context. Metallica took 3 years between Master of Puppets and Injustice for All. Megadeth took 2 years between Peace Sells and So Far So Good So What. Anthrax only got 18 months, and everyone involved knew it wasn't enough. By 1987, they had done something genuinely remarkable. They'd taken the raw, violent energy of thrash metal and somehow made it fun. They made it accessible without being soft, weird without being alienating. Among the Living was a masterpiece of timing and execution. It was tight, fast, unforgettable. You had characters like Randall Flagg from Stephen King's The Stand. There was a story about a Holocaust survivor wrapped in one of the most ferocious riffs Charlie Benante ever put to tape. And yes, the drummer did write the riffs, by the way. I did a video on this. You can check it out. It's in the playlist. But anyway, that album didn't just succeed. It redefined what Anthrax could be. Megaforce and their new major distribution partner, Island Records, saw a band at peak commercial momentum and made the calculation that labels always make. Strike while hot. Never mind the band had just spent the better part of 2 years writing and touring behind Among the Living. Never mind that I'm the Man had just dropped, which was the EP. I also just did a video on that. And given their first genuine crossover moment just happened, the message was clear: get back in the studio and get in there fast. So that's what Anthrax did, and the result was State of Euphoria, released in September 1988, one of the most fascinating, frustrating, and genuinely underrated albums in their catalog. Let me tell you why. The writing process for the record is almost painful to describe because it's so different from how great albums are supposed to get made. There was no months-long retreat, no time to sit with ideas, let them breathe, figure out which riffs were keepers and which were filler. Instead, Charlie Benante, the band's primary musical architect, was sketching structures on acoustic guitars during sound checks, jotting down ideas on the tour bus, doing the creative work in the cracks between shows. Once the tour wrapped at the end of 1987, they had a brief window to get into rehearsal rooms in Yonkers, New York, and try to stitch those fragments together into actual songs. Scott Ian came in to write the lyrics, biting, socio-political as always, but the clock was constantly ticking. And then in April 1988, they flew down to Quadradial Studios in Miami with producer Mark Dodson and engineer Alex Peralius, and they had 2 months, April to June, to track the entire record. Benante has talked about this period in candid terms over the years. He described the tracking as premature, like they were recording working versions of the songs rather than the finished ones. There is a 30th anniversary reissue of this album that included what became known as Charlie's Stash, which were raw rehearsal tapes from that period. And if you go listen to them, you can hear exactly what he means. The band is still figuring out transitions, still deciding what goes where, and then they went in and recorded it anyway. That's a shadow that hangs over this album. Not failure. State of Euphoria went gold and charted higher globally than Among the Living. Commercially it worked, but artistically the band knew what it was. Scott Ian spent the better part of 35 years saying this in interviews. Now here's where I want you to push back a little, because I think the rushed narrative, while true, gets used as a reason to dismiss the album that deserves a little better. So let's talk about what's on this record. There is some good stuff. The first song, or the first single, Antisocial, is a cover track originally recorded by French heavy metal band Trust. It's an absolute freight train of a song. It became the biggest single of Anthrax's career up to that point. It was a Headbangers Bowl staple, captures what Anthrax live must have been in 1988. It was rowdy and it was chaotic. You could see fans in the crowd holding up the giant cardboard cutout of the Knot Man and this other character with this big, giant mask of the Knot Man and all that. And it becomes one of those images that crystallizes in a moment of time. That song also justified the record's existence. Then it was Be All End All. This opens with a cello intro played by Carol Friedman. Sounds like it has no business being on a thrash metal album, but it works. It sets this ominous, almost progressive tone that makes the eventual riff payoff hit harder. Then there's Who Cares Wins. This is a song that runs nearly 7 minutes. It tackles homelessness. The music video shows scenes of homeless people in the streets, shows footage of the band playing the song in this dimly lit room. The music video was directed by Paul Rockman. He was the guy who also directed the documentary American Hardcore. We also got some cool deep cuts here. We have Now It's Dark. Which is a direct homage to David Lynch's Blue Velvet. It tracks the behavior of Frank Booth, Dennis Hopper's terrifying villain. The title is literally one of Booth's lines from the film. Misery Loves Company is written from Annie Wilkes' perspective, the obsessive captor from Stephen King's Misery, based on the 1987 novel, a year before the movie even existed. The band was living inside Stephen King's bibliography long before it was fashionable. Even on Among the Living, there were some Stephen King songs. For example, Skeleton in the Closet was from Apt Pupil, Lone Justice was from the Dark Tower series. It's a genuine, consistent, creative obsession, and State of Euphoria continues it. Now let's talk about the production. It's kind of where the Rush timeline really shows its teeth. This was actually the first Anthrax CD that I ever bought as a new release, and I still have my 1988 CD. It's just in a different jewel case because that got broken over the years. But this one has a pretty flat mix, and the band has acknowledged this. Where Among the Living had that punchy, aggressive New York guitar crunch, State of Euphoria sounds dry by comparison. There's a thinness to the sonic palette that works against Dan Spitz's leads and Bonante's drumming, both of which are genuinely excellent underneath it. You can hear the bones of a great record, but the connective tissue just isn't there. After mixing at Quadradial Studios in New York, the album came out and immediately had to contend with the impossible comparison. When your previous record is Among the Living, you don't just need to be good, you need to be great in a specific way. And State of Euphoria really wasn't, it was good, maybe very good in places, but it didn't have that locked-in, inevitable quality that made Among the Living feel like every song belonged exactly where it was. By the time the touring cycle ended, the band had essentially made a quiet decision. Most of the album was coming off the set list. Aside from Antisocial and occasionally Be All End All, State of Euphoria is largely disappeared from their live show for decades. The band had already pivoted. They were thinking about what came next, and what came next was Persistence of Time, which would be a future video. That album was darker and heavier and made under entirely different circumstances. But here's the thing about albums that get dismissed. The 30th anniversary remaster happened and people went back, and what they found was that the original mix had been obscuring something real. With that sonic cleanup applied, the riffs hit harder. Bonante's technical drumming, which had always been there, it came forward in the mix, and the record started to sound less like a casualty of a label pressure and more like a document of a band at an interesting transitional moment. Not as tidy as what came before, not as controlled as what came after, but alive with ideas. There's an argument to be made, and I'd make it, the State of Euphoria is more interesting than it is great, which in itself is a reason to spend time with it. It's the sound of a band operating under constraints, making real creative choices, pulling from Lynch and King and televangelists and homeless advocacy, and occasionally doing something genuinely unexpected in between. It's the album Anthrax couldn't stop apologizing for, but also the album worth defending. Next time we head into what most fans consider the band's heaviest, most disciplined statement, Persistence of Time. The fun is dialed way back, and the riffs are as brutal as anything they recorded, and Charlie Bonante got the time he needed. So if you haven't subscribed yet, check out this playlist. It has the whole story of Anthrax up to now. I just add them as I make them. Like and subscribe, all that good stuff. Thanks for watching. I will see you in the next one.